Hi, Todd Ortscheid here with GTL Real Estate. This week I'd like to talk about the length of your lease, how long your lease should be, whether it should be for a short period of time or for longer. And these recommendations I'm going to give are universal, whether you're managing your property yourself or whether you have a property management company managing the property for you. I recommend this for everybody, for all leases. So our recommendation is you want all leases to be 1 year in length. You don't want to do really short-term leases, and you don't want to do longer-term leases for a few different reasons. So the primary reason for that is that all of the benefit of a long-term lease is really going to the tenant. They're getting locked in, they're getting possession of the property for this guaranteed period of time, and the only way you're able to get rid of them, if something changes in your life where you need to get back into your property, let's say you signed a 3-year lease on a property and after 2 years you need to get back in, the only way for you to do that is to pay that tenant a sizable amount of money, give them 2 months notice, and pay them basically to leave the property early. Because they have possession, that also means that if they refuse to leave, the only way you're going to get rid of them is to take them to court and force them out, and you're still going to have to pay that amount of money and still give them that much notice, even if you evict them in that case. So, the tenant is, because they have possession of the property, they have the upper hand. On the other hand, if the tenant wants to break the lease in the middle of the lease, even if, let's say you have a 5-year lease term, so you think you've locked this tenant in for a long period of time, maybe you even have automatic rent increases. But the problem is if the tenant gets to that 2-year mark, let's say, even of a 5-year lease, they're just going to leave if they want to. And the reason for that is it's very difficult for you to chase them down and hold them accountable for that. And in fact, a judge is not going to award you the rest of that three remaining years of that 5-year lease. They're not going to award you that rent, even if you take that tenant to court. They'll only award you for the period of time it was vacant. And that's if you can find the tenant to file a lawsuit against them anyway. So in this situation, with this long-term lease, you're getting basically no benefit. The tenant is getting a whole lot of benefit. So right off the bat, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it goes beyond that. There's a few other reasons just from a legal perspective and from a few other things that we want to look at where even if this wasn't the case, that it still wouldn't be a good idea. So, the first of those is fair market rents. So almost all the time, fair market rents are increasing year to year. Now, there are certain times in very local markets usually where rents are reducing. But that's pretty rare. Usually, even during a recession, rents aren't dropping. And that's because the population is not shrinking. So the population is always growing. So people always need property. Now, housing prices may drop because people are renting instead of buying. But the rental prices, sometimes you'll even watch rents go up during a recession. It's very rare to see fair market rents actually decline. So what that means is if you're on a long-term lease, you're missing out on those rent increases. So even if you write a lease with built-in rent increases, let's say we did a 3-year lease today and we built in 3% rent increases for the next 3 years. Well, what if the market gets really hot and the average rent is going up 10% a year? That's not unheard of. Right now in certain parts of Denver, rents are going up 15% a year. So if a landlord had signed a lease with a tenant for 3, 4, 5 years, with built-in rent increases even of 5%, which would have been considered high several years ago, they're now missing out on all those rent increases that would have been very easy for them to get if they had only done 1-year leases and up the rent every year. So, it's in your best interest to make sure that you're able to increase that rent using fair market rents every single year. And doing a long-term lease isn't going to let you do that. The other reason to look at that is, or to consider only doing year leases, is because the law is constantly changing, and it's not just statutory law, the laws that legislators are actually passing, it's also case law. So, when cases go to court, whether it's an eviction case or maybe it's a lawsuit over repairs or whatever the case may be, if it gets to state court, a judge will issue a decision and that becomes precedent. So that's case law. So future judges in that same state are going to look to that decision to decide what to do. So that means even when the actual written law hasn't changed, frequently the way judges are interpreting it and applying it does change. So what we do is we have our attorneys constantly update our leases. And since our attorneys are in court and constantly seeing what these changing case law standards are, they're in a perfect position to be able to modify this lease for us as the law and as the case law changes. So as they see these things, these trends change, they're able to put things into our lease agreement to keep up with that. So it's important to be able to get a tenant on a new lease every year, so you're including all of those changes that keep you protected as the landlord. Also, obviously, it could just be that you have policies that you want to change in your lease. Maybe you used to have a pet fee of $100 in your lease, but now you have, when you're writing new leases, you want it to be $250. So you want to get that tenant on that new lease, so you've got that higher pet fee built in if that tenant decides to get a pet. So that's just one example of something that might change. It's not a legal change, it's just a change that you want to make, and you want to make sure that the tenant is on the most recent lease so that that change is in there. Finally, it's just a better idea from your perspective to be on a current lease agreement. So the reason I talk about this is sometimes landlords say, well, let's do a one-year lease, but then let the tenant go month to month afterwards. Just basically let them stay in the property, and we'll keep extending the original lease without actually doing a new lease agreement. You don't want to do that. You always want to have your tenant on a new lease agreement that's actually covering the period of time that you're in. And the reason for that is because judges will favor that. So we've had a case, this was I believe about 6 months ago, where we went to court with a month-to-month lease where the owner had asked us to do that, and at that time we didn't have a policy against it. We did what the owner asked and did a month-to-month lease after the tenant's original lease expired. Then that tenant subsequently stopped paying the rent. So we had to go to court to evict that tenant. Well, the judge said because it was a month-to-month lease instead of an actual lease covering that period of time, he wasn't going to allow us to have any late fees. And he found some precedent buried into some old commercial real estate case that allowed him to do this. So, if we had a firm lease agreement, a real lease agreement that covered that period of time instead of just a month-to-month lease after the original lease, then the owner would have gotten several hundred more dollars of late fees that they lost because they were on that month-to-month lease. So that's why we always tell everyone, always be on a current lease, keep it at a one-year term, and make sure you're constantly updating that every single year. Don't let it lapse to a month-to-month lease. Always get a new one signed. So those are some of the reasons for that. If you have any questions about any of that, or any comments or anything, just please send us an email, support@gtlrealestate.com, and we'll be happy to talk to you. Thanks.